Hello, everyone. Joe Jordan here from CE4 Research Group, and welcome to the Piercing the Cosmic Veil show. We are a YouTube show that interviews people from all parts of the world that have had their lives destroyed and turned upside down from their opening of doors or dabbling into areas that God warns us to stay away from. Areas such as divination, channeling, alternative healing practices such as Reiki, mind-altering drugs, the occult, the paranormal, New Age and metaphysical practices, and even the UFO alien abduction phenomenon. Areas of study that have led them away from the one true God. But we also show how they become free from the horrors of their experiences through a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. For those of you that had the opportunity to watch our first inaugural show, you might have seen that we had a number of co-hosts that are going to be helping do the show as we proceed in the future. Tonight is just me doing the hosting of the show. I have a guest on, but some of the comments that came from the first show was we had a longtime follower that asked, who are these new people with CE4 and what is their background, and how did they come to be involved with CE4? And I thought we'd start with that today and in this show. And you saw Mick, who you see here now, is part of CE4. He was a co-host on the last show, and I figured we start with him, and we're going to discuss his background and experiences that he was involved with and what brought him to his association with CE4 Research Group and how he's going to be helping out with us. So welcome to the show, Mick, and take a moment and introduce who you are, where you're from, a little bit of your background, maybe your profession. So we're going to treat this as an investigation. You're an experiencer, and we're just going to capture all the information we can so that anybody else out there, our peers in the research realm, will be able to look at the things that you were part of and come from, to be able to maybe associate that with anything else that they're doing in their study.
Yeah, g'day,
Okay.
Joe. It's lovely to meet you. My name's Mick Harrison. I'm an experiencer. I'm 59 years old. I grew up in a little country town called Longwarry in Gippsland, Victoria. I currently live in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. This story I'm going to tell you today is about how I had an encounter in a very isolated property up in Gippsland, in an area where I lived and worked. And it was an extremely life-changing experience that made my whole life just turn upside down. I did a big 180-degree turn in my life. So there's a bit of a lead up to this story. Approximately 27 years ago, before my son was born, I stayed in Melbourne overnight in a friend's place, and we we got up in the morning and we were driving home. I had to drive back because I was in the Country Fire Authority, and I had to do what they call a radio sked. And on the way home, I'm driving down a street in Melbourne with my wife at the time, and I look over to my left and I see this black UFO, and I'm right into aviation. I'm a private pilot, and I've been flying on and off for years, although I haven't flown for years. And I'm very aware of different aircraft, you name it, jets and propeller driven aircraft, balloons, rockets, bombs or whatever. And this thing was phenomenal. The only way to describe it, it was a jet black craft, approximately, I'd say about a kilometre away, and it kind of looked like a stingray. It had like bits hanging down off the side of it, and And that was the beginning of it. That was about 27 years ago. And I sort of, you know, I thought, what's going on here? But, you know, that was a UFO. And the next day I rang a fairly major newspaper here in Australia called the Herald Sun. And it was only known as the Sun at the time. And I rang them and asked if anyone had reported seeing a UFO, because I pulled over in a service station and got out of my car. And there's all these cars going up and down the road. And I'm looking at this thing and I'm thinking, can anyone else see this thing? And yeah, so I rang the newspaper and I just got a deathly silence. And I was pretty angry at the time. I thought, you know, why treat me like that? But later on in my research, I found out why, which is neither here nor there. So leading up to this experience, I'm an arborist by trade. I left school at 17 and I started working for my father. And my father used to clear power lines for the State Electricity Commission. And we used to travel all over Gippsland, you know, cutting trees away from power lines. We used to use travel towers, and I was sort of a, you know, a man of the bush sort of thing. I was, you know, always out and about in the countryside, and I worked in trees for years and years and years, and I become an arborist in 1995, and so I was, you know, I'm well versed in trees, and this job we had to, you know, go up and clear a gentleman's driveway up in the Strzelecki Mountains, and I was like my company was based in Druin, and we had to go up to a place called Yarragon South. So anyone from Australia will probably be aware of this place. And we'd been to this property several times beforehand. And, you know, there's neither here nor there. It was just another client, you know, where I worked. And it was sort of a semi-isolated property. It was in amongst eucalypt plantations, and sort of it was semi-remnant vegetation. So a lot of it was natural bush with eucalypts and you know, dogwoods and wattle trees and things, and so it was sort of, yeah, just sort of a semi-isolated property. I had two guys that worked with me. One guy was working with me for years, and I'll call them Bill and Ben because that's not their real name, because I don't want to utilise their real name. Later on we may do, but I won't at the moment for their protection. And Ben was, he was my apprentice. He was an adult apprentice. I was over here in Australia, you can be an apprentice, you know, right from when you leave school, or if you're, say, around about 25 or whatever, you can do an adult apprenticeship. And the other guy, Bill, he was with me he worked for me for about 21 years, and he come along on this day. Now, with Ben was a pretty switched on young bloke. You know, he was a good worker, very reliable, didn't drink. And we went into this property, and we'd worked there before, and, you know, had no hassles. And anyway, while we were working there, Ben come up to me in the afternoon and he said, "Mick, there's something wrong. There's something wrong." I said, "What's the matter, mate?" He said, "Oh, down near the water tanks." He said, "I don't know, I've got this creepy feeling and I just don't feel right." And I kind of looked at him and I thought, that's weird, you know, and I'm going to be really honest with you, Joe, I thought nothing more of it, you know. I just thought, oh, well, you know, he's probably just having a bad day. And I sort of never really thought any more of it. That was, you know, about as far as it kind of went. And I said to him, "Look, you know, come up here, Ben, and just work around us." And then I went down there and I'm, you know, looking around, wondering what was, you know, bothering him. And I, you know, and I thought maybe, I don't know, I just didn't have a clue. So I just shrugged it off and never worried about it. So about a week later, Ben left me. He went and worked for another job. So he completed his apprenticeship and he got a job actually in earth moving. So he got out of trees after all that time. And so a fortnight after that event, Tim and myself Bill and myself went back to this property. So I'll just start the whole day, how it all come about. So I got up 6:30 in the morning. It was just a normal day, and I had breakfast, jumped in my Toyota Land Cruiser and drive down to the shed that we have where we used to store all our tippers and chippers and travel towers and stump grinders and things. And I got to think about this, and I said to Bill, look, we're going up to Yarragon South to, do a job up there again. And he said, yeah, no worries. So I said to Bill, I'll head off earlier and I'll just see you up there. So I jumped in the Toyota and away I went, and it was probably, I guess, about a half-hour drive up to the place. I drove up there, and I got there around about 15 minutes earlier than Bill. And so I pulled up and I opened the gate and I drove into the property, and the owner wasn't there. The owner comes from Melbourne, although now he resides at the place. But he was a Melbourne resident, but he owned this property. And I pulled into the place and I pulled up the Toyota over to the side of the track so Tim could come. I'm just going to call him Tim. So Tim could come into the place, and I all of a sudden started to begin to get this feeling of being watched. Now, I'm a ex-hunter, right? And there's nothing in Australian bush that scares me, other than snakes and spiders. We don't have overly dangerous animals other than crocodiles, and they're up in northern Australia. We have wild pigs, but they're not around where this property was. We have deer that potentially can attack you in the rut, but all the deer in Australia are introduced and there's no deer there. And so here I am, I'm beside my Toyota, and I start unpacking all my gear, getting out the chainsaws and refueling them and sharpening them, waiting for Tim to come up. And this feeling of being watched was overwhelming, right? And it got to a point at one stage where I felt it was almost physical. It was bizarre, right? So here I am, and I'm going about my business, but I'm sort of looking around and I'm thinking, what is this? And in my mind, I'm looking around up in the trees for a wedge-tailed eagle or a hawk or a fox, and none of these things are going to attack you, but I just felt that I was being watched. And every now and then I'm looking around, but every now and then I'd sort of look to a certain point up on a bit of a rise, a bit of a hill. And when I'm talking about this bit of a hill, it was only maybe 50 or 100 meters, sort of, it wasn't looking miles away. And there was like all just trees and bush and shrubs and things, but there was this black thing that just I kept looking to. And then I go about my stuff and I look back and I'd scan around, but just I kept getting drawn to this one spot. And then next minute I hear the truck coming up the hill, and here comes Tim. So anyway, he pulled around and I guided him through the gate, because we're pretty particular with our vehicles that we didn't scratch them and stuff. And I guided him through the gate, and he pulls up. And anyway, I said to Tim, okay, we're just going to go through here and do the gentleman's driveway, and we're going to do what we used to call a 1 in 5. So it's in 1 meter and up 5 meters, and we sort of cut a square into the driveway type of thing, so they can get like furniture vans and tip trucks and stuff through there without knocking on low branches. And it was just a typical thing we do all the time. We used to contract through Vic Roads and other councils and shires, and we used to clear roads for cattle trucks and high loads and things. So this feeling at that time had gone, and I thought nothing more of it. I thought, just, what's going on? I'm just having a bad day. So away we went, and I used to have a Rayco chipper. It was a 12-inch chipper, so you could get 12-inch round logs and feed them into the chipper, and it would just eat them. it was amazing. It was the most powerful thing ever. It was brilliant, but extremely loud, right? And so we started off by at the top end of the driveway near the main road, and we worked into the house of this property, and it took us 3/4 of a day to do. And as we're working, it was around about 8:30, I think, when we started, and we worked through till 10 o'clock in the morning, you know, to have our smoko or our brew. And while we were working, Tim was doing the cutting and I was feeding the hogger and or the mulcher. And this feeling just every now and then would come back. And now my mulcher, hogger, chipper, it used to rev extremely loud. Like it was, if you didn't have earmuffs on, you couldn't stand near the thing. Well, I couldn't. It's just mega loud, you know, like, you know, with the, you know, ding, 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 and a chip, chip, chip of the, you know, the thing feeding the logs in. And, but this feeling of being watched was still coming in and out while I was doing that. Now, I really questioned my sanity at this stage. I'm starting to think, what is this? This is weird, you know. So we worked through at 10 o'clock. We had our smoko, and I just never mentioned this to Tim. I just thought, oh, well, you know, I'm just having a bad day or something's going on. So we worked from, say, 10:15, I think it was, through to 1 o'clock. And we had some lunch then. We had a half an hour break. And halfway along the track into this property, there was a big cleared area. It was like a little miniature football oval sort of thing. It was all nice and manicured grass where all the wallabies and wombats and things, you know, had eaten all the grass and potentially deer or whatever, because there's deer in the area. There was fallow deer. And anyway, I said to Tim, I'm just going to duck up to the house and go to the toilet. So I jumped in my Toyota and zipped up to the house, and I went to the toilet, and it's quite an interesting toilet. It was, I'll say, and please excuse me, but it was a loo with a view. You could, you know, it didn't have a door on it or whatever, but it was like a small room, and it had a little library in it. And I remember, you know, looking at this library of books, and it was all occult stuff. You know, it was how to cast spells, and there's books on the universe. There's books on Bigfoot. There's books on UFOs, and what else was there? Just all that type of thing. And I was just really curious. So I'm pulling books out and flicking through them, looking at the pictures and whatnot. And anyway, all of a sudden, I'm on there, and next thing I hear this bang. And to describe it, it sounded like someone had a big piece of wood and they belted it against a tin shed. You know, like they've, you know, whacked it with a, you know, like a baseball bat.
Sure.
And I thought, wow, that's strange. There must be someone here. And anyway, I got out of the toilet and I walked up towards the house, and I looked over in the direction of where I had seen this or heard this noise. And I'm looking around, and there's nothing there. There's no people, there's nothing there. And I think that's a bit weird. But, you know, being an arborist, I know that trees shed limbs. And over here in Australia, we have a phenomenon in trees. It's called sudden limb drop or summer limb drop. And there's a species of trees here called a river redgum, Eucalyptus cameldulensis. And they're renowned for dropping huge, big limbs. And nearly every year someone gets killed along what they call the Murray River. There's a huge river called the Murray River that has all these eucalyptus trees along it, and they drop limbs on caravans and tents and kill people. And anyway, I'm looking at the, you know, where this noise was, and there's a little, like a chook shed, and I'm looking at it thinking, oh, well, you know, maybe the trees just dropped a limb, thought no more of it. So I jump back to my Toyota, go back to Tim, and away we go, and we work through to around about 3:30, and we finished the job, and I said to Tim, all right, we'll go up and unload the mulch out of the tipper. So we drove up, and there's a specific spot where the owner wanted the mulch dropped. And anyway, so we unhooked the chipper and we're dumping the mulch, and all of a sudden I hear in the distance, I hear this helicopter. and I'm right into aviation. I'm listening and said, oh, that's the Dauphin. That'll be the police helicopter because it's got a very distinct noise. It's got a, I think they call it a Fenstrom rear rotor, and a very, very distinct noise. And anyone that's watching, you know, knows about aircraft. You know, there's certain aircraft that just have really distinct noises that you know that they are, like a Cessna 337, which is a push-pull aircraft, and they just have a very distinct noise. And you know, I'm right into it. So I'm looking there, and all of a sudden, yep, fair enough. I see this, you know, helicopter going through, and I used to be in the country fire authority as a volunteer firefighter, and I know that the helicopter, if it, you know, is going over to a potentially a car crash, or you know, maybe there's been a robbery up in the, you know, a local town, and they're going to try and spot, you know, the people hiding or something. And so I didn't sort of think much of it, but I really looked at the, you know, the helicopter. It wasn't all that far away. I'm guessing it was only about 300-400 meters away. And later on in the story, this all has a bearing into the whole story. So we finished dumping the mulch. We reattached the chipper. And I said to Tim, okay, we'll go out the front gate and we'll just cut these small trees away that on the way in were sort of, I had to stand against them. So, you know, they didn't scratch the truck. And I said to Tim, we'll just cut them off and piff them down the bank. So we drove back to the front gate of this property, and Tim stopped and I stopped. I got out the chainsaw and cut them off, and we just threw them down the bank because it wasn't worth, you know, starting up the chipper again just for half a dozen small bushes. And Tim said to me, you know, do you want a hand to pack up, Mick? And I said, no, she'll be right. It's all good. You get going, because it's going to take you a fair while to get down the hill, because it was a really, like, it was up in the Strzelecki Mountains, and it's a fairly narrow, windy road down to Yarragon to go home. So I walked out on the dirt road, and I guided Tim through the gateway, and I gave him a thumbs up, and I said, I'll see you 7:30 at the shed tomorrow, and yeah, see you, and away he went. So now's when things really got scary. What happened after that point?
Mick, before you get into that, let me ask a couple questions, because I want to get this on record.
Yep.
Because we're doing this like an investigation.
Yep.
Trying to make sure I got them all here. When you were in the toilet and you looked at the library, these books that you were looking at, had you ever looked at any books like this before prior to this? Were you familiar with the New Age metaphysical realm and the occult?
Yes, I'm going to say yes. Yeah, I had looked at a bit of it. Yeah, you know, down the track, leading up to it, but I'd never seen these particular books, and they were quite interesting. Yeah.
Trying to get a perspective on the property that you're talking about. You talk about going in through a gate, and there being more than one gate to the property. So if there's a gate, that means the property itself is probably fenced off all the way around?
Yes, it was, yeah.
So that leads me to a question, because I'm not from this area here. If the property is all fenced around, how big a property are we talking?
I'm guessing, because it was like I said, you know, it was like remnant vegetation and like forested. I'm guessing, I'll say 100 acres.
Okay.
But either side of that 100 acres was like eucalypt plantations and other rural properties.
Mm-hmm.
But they were fairly, like, it wasn't like it was miles from anywhere type of thing. There was other houses, but they were probably 1 kilometre or 2 kilometres apart, you know, 2 miles apart type of thing.
You talk about animals being on the property, different kinds of animals.
Yeah.
How did they traverse, you know, a fence line? Have you ever seen that?
Yeah, definitely. Here in Australia, like kangaroos, they're amazing. They'll go in under fences if they're only barbed wire or what they call plain wire fences. They'll just go straight through them. And wombats and wallabies are only fairly small. They're not overly large. Like a wombat's around about, you know, a foot tall, maybe 18 inches tall. Wallabies, they're like small kangaroos. the deer can jump fences like they're not there. You know, I know definitely there was fallow deer in the area and potentially sambar. I think there was escapee red deer.
So what are the fences for?
Um,
Just curious.
yeah, well, over here in Australia, it's a big thing for everyone to put a fence up, you know, to divide off their property, to show this is my bit of land and that's your bit of land. And
Okay.
the gate I'm talking about was a 12-foot rural property fence gate, and they pivot, you know, they're 12-foot wide,
Sure.
and most vehicles are 8-foot, so you've got a bit of room either side to get through, and they pivot through. And this is interesting you say that, because the gate is a very important part of this story. So would you like me to continue?
One more. Are there any cattle in the area? Sheep
No.
or cattle?
There was sheep in some of the properties on the way up. You know, when I was on my way up, I didn't notice sheep. Cattle, there probably was, but it was sort of more of a plantation area, like
Yeah.
you know, they had pine trees as well.
Okay.
Pinus radiata, yeah.
Okay. Back to the story.
Yeah, so at this point, I can only say it was life-changing, Joe. It made me do a 180-degree turn in life. It made me realise that we're lied to, and I'm a pretty easygoing sort of a guy, but I really detest being lied to. And after this event, I realised this whole world is based on a lot of deception and lies, and it changed my life. It changed my family's life, and but it brought me to this point here, and I'm very fortunate. And probably the biggest thing is it led me to Jesus. That's the biggest thing, and Jesus is my saviour. I can assure you. All right. So Tim left, and I walked back in, and I had to pack up all my gear on my Toyota. And on my Toyota, it had cupboards. So behind the cabin, there was a cupboard that opened around, another one lifted up, and on the far side, there's another one that lifted up. And the front cupboard is only about 2 foot wide, and we used to store our fuel and oil and stuff in there. And then there's another cupboard behind that had all our chainsaws and block and tackles. And then on the far side was all our ropes. And during the day, when we'd been doing this clearing, we'd been using what we call a pole saw. It's a big extension saw that reaches up, I think it's about 3 meters. And then when you hold it up, you can reach about 5 meters with it. And I walked around the back of the Toyota, and all of a sudden, this feeling of being watched came over me again, and it became extremely intense. And I remember walking around the back of my Toyota, and I picked up my chainsaws, and I walked back, and I put them down on the ground so I could put one in at a time, because I grabbed two at once. And all of a sudden, I started to vibrate. And the only way to describe it, it started here at the back of my skull, and it went right down my back. Now, at the time, I didn't think of my spine, right? I don't know why, but this vibration, I used to describe it was about, you know, this round about the size of a Coca-Cola tin, and it went right down my back, and it was like an intense vibration. It started off very gentle, but then it got more and more intense. And I remember sort of thinking, what is this? And I picked up my chainsaw and I put it in the cupboard. And then the vibration went further and further out. And the next minute, my whole body was vibrating. And the only way to describe it, here in Melbourne, we have a place called Luna Park where it's a fun park where you can go there and go on roller coasters and rah, rah, rah. And there's a place there called the Haunted House. And part of it, when you walk through the place, you stand on the floor and the floor vibrates. It's a really intense vibration, and it must be activated by pressure. And that is the only way I can describe how I felt throughout my body, like this intense vibration. And I remember saying to I don't know if I said it or thought it, what the frick is this? What is this? And I remember at one point holding my hands out in front of me and looking at them, expecting them to be doing this, but they weren't. They were just normal, but the vibration was just right through my body. And all of a sudden, I also noticed that everything went surreally quiet. Like, the old story, you could hear a pin drop. Well, that's how it was. Where I was, there's birds and trees and, there's noise in the bush, but everything went surreally quiet. And I thought, what is this? And I'm looking around thinking, what is this? And I walked around to the back of my Toyota and I looked down the track that's leading back into the house, just, a kilometre down the track. And there's this little kid standing there with no top on. And I'm thinking, where'd this little kid come from? And I remember standing there looking, and I'm just staring. I honestly don't know how long this stare went for. I'm guessing 10, 15 seconds, trying to compute what I'm seeing. And all of a sudden, I realise what I'm seeing. And over your left shoulder, there's a picture of an extraterrestrial there. Yes. And that's basically what I was looking at. And I remember, I don't know whether I said it or thought it, frick me. And I'm looking at this thing, and mate, I worked, after I'd finished trees, I gave up trees, and I worked in the ambulance industry for 9.5 years, and we used to have a pain score. Pain being 0, no pain being 0, and 10 being the worst pain you could ever experience. The way to describe that is, quite obviously, 0 is no pain. 10 for a woman, I'd say childbirth. For a guy, if I got your arm right now, Joe, you got a chainsaw and cut your arm off, that's 10.
Or right? Kidney stone.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Oh yeah, I transported people like that. And although they couldn't have painkillers from memory with a kidney stone. So here I am looking at this little being, and it was only, I'd guess, I reckon 3 feet tall, maybe a smidgen taller. It had a really big head. It wasn't grey. It was actually sort of a creamy white colour.
Mm-hmm.
Very skinny arms, skinny legs. I don't remember its hands. It's weird because I was looking at it, but I don't remember its hands and I don't remember its feet. But its eyes, oh mate, the eyes were so intense. They were jet black. They were almond shaped and sloping back like in that photo there. And the fear, from 0 to 10, my fear was 15. It was off the scale. You got no idea. Now, in my life, mate, I've done a lot of things. I've gone solo in an aeroplane at 16. I've parachuted, jumped out of airplanes. I've done a lot of stuff that is potentially scary and fearful. Nothing even rates with what I was looking at. So I've gone all through my life being told that anyone that sees an extraterrestrial or, you know, a UFO, this is all garbage, you know, you're a liar, you're, you know, delusional, you're this or you're that. And I can assure you, mate, on that day, I was none of the above. I wasn't drinking, I wasn't taking drugs, you know, it's just.
I was getting ready to ask you those questions.
Yeah, I was just me. So here I am looking at this thing, and we were just eyeballing one another, and it was around about 25 meters away. So that's, say, 25 yards for American viewers. And we're just looking at one another. I've got my hand up on the side of the Toyota, just looking, you know, and it's an intense thing. And like fight or flight come into my mind. And I remember at one point, I was really concentrating on my peripheral vision, listening, and there was no sound. It was bizarre. There was just no noise. And the fight or flight, mate, back then I was pretty buff and, you know, I didn't like fighting, but I thought, game on. It was just a natural reaction. And I'm looking at this thing and the fear was off the scale and I'm vibrating and I'm looking at this thing and I'm thinking, whoa, what is this? And then I don't know what it was. I really don't know what it was, but at a certain point, and I honestly don't know how long it was. I don't know whether it was a minute, 2 minutes, whatever. I calmed down and my fear dropped off. Because this thing just stood there looking at me. I don't remember seeing it blink or moving around. It was just standing on the side of the track looking at me, right? And I thought, look, I've got to pack up. I've got to, you know, pack my gear up. Now, in one sense, I probably could have just gone around and shut all the cupboards and drove out. But I just, no, look, I'll just go about my business, because I kind of come to a point where I didn't feel threatened. So I packed up, you know, all my gear. I'm putting it in the cupboards. And again, I don't know how long that took. I'll guess 6-7 minutes, and that's a guess. I honestly, time sort of didn't really correlate. And just while I'm packing up, every now and then I just glance back and it's still just standing there watching me, right? It never advanced on me. It never walked sideways or backwards or anything like that. And anyway, I had to climb up onto the back of the Toyota. There was like a gap between the two cupboards that you could get.
Mm-hmm.
So I stood on the tow bar up onto the back of it, and I had a pole saw, you know, and I had to strap it onto the roll cage near the cabin, and I strapped it on, and I turned around, and I'm looking back, I'm looking straight at it, right? And I had a peak cap on, and I looked up, and there it was standing. I'm just standing there between the cupboards looking at it, and it's looking at me. And I'm thinking, all right, I'm done now. I'm out of here. Please don't abduct me. Let me get out of here. And I walked along the back of the Toyota. I stepped off it, and I walked around the right-hand side, because here in Australia, we, you know, right-hand drive vehicles. And the door was open on the Toyota, and I remember stepping into the Toyota. And I remember, you know, reading about where UFOs are seen and cars stop and they won't start and the engine stops. And anyway, I remember stepping into my Toyota and I threw the clutch and I put it in neutral. And I grabbed hold of the key and I turned the key, and I distinctly remember saying, please start, please start, please start. Boom, and it started. And mate, to listen to a 6-cylinder diesel engine start was the most beautiful sound I've ever heard in my life. And I put it in gear and I shut the door and I drove out the gate. And, you know, being an old farm or country person, you know, if you find a gate closed, you close it. You find it, or, you know, if you find it open, you always leave it open. So I pulled out onto the road and I had to walk back and shut this gate. And again, it was a 12-foot, you know, farm gate. So I had to walk in. I only walked in halfway, and luckily the gate didn't drag. It swung, you know. And all I had to do was look up like that, and I'll be looking at it again. But I just had my little peak cap on. I just couldn't look. I just walked up, I grabbed the gate, and I just pulled it shut. And again, all this time I'm vibrating. There's no sound other than the Toyota starting. And I remember reaching through and grabbing hold of the chain and pulling it through the gate and locking it over the, the little knob. And I walked back and I got back in my Toyota, which I'd left running, shut the door, put on my seatbelt. And all I had to do was that. And I would have been looking at it again, but just something said, don't look, just go. And for some reason, I don't know why this was, but for some reason I had this weird thought come over my mind, that I was going to get abducted or something. But I remember looking up and looking down the road where I had to drive, and I had this vision for a second of, half a dozen of them walking down the road going, you ain't going anywhere. And there was nothing there, quite obviously, thankfully. And so I put it in gear. I looked in this mirror, there's nothing behind me. And I look in that mirror, there's nothing there, no cars or no beings or anything. And all I had to do was just do that, and I would have been looking at it, and I just couldn't look. And I drove off. I drove about, I reckon, 80 meters, 80 yards, and it all stopped. The vibration stopped. Just this weird feeling just vanished, just went away. From that point,
did all the sounds come back?
Yes, everything come back to normal. And I remember I did then start to shake, realistically shaken, uncontrollably in the vehicle, like I'm really shaking throughout my body where I could physically see myself shaking. I remember trying to get some sense of reality where I turned on the radio in the Toyota, to listen to the radio. And to show you my age, it's a bit of a running joke over here. If you listen to the ABC, you're over 50 years old. The ABC is a broadcasting channel, that talks about current affairs and things. And I turned on the radio. And from that point to the highway, which I'm not going to tell you exactly because we'll give away, but let's say it was 18 kilometres from that point to the highway, to the main road down this hill off the Strzelecki Mountains. And I don't remember any of it. I do not remember driving down. It's weird. And I got to the highway and I had to go through some traffic lights and turn left to go back to Druin where I lived at the time. And I thought, who do I tell? Who the hell do I tell? And I had at one stage, I go on.
Let's pause right there, and we'll return. And remembering the question, you're thinking, who could you possibly tell? That's where we'll pick up from. We're going to take a short commercial break, and I do have one more question before we move on to answering your question you're asking of where who are you going to tell. So Let's take a couple of minutes, and we'll let a commercial fill in, and then we'll be right back.
Okay.
Welcome back, everybody. We just left off with Mick's questioning himself and his sanity, and he's like, who am I going to tell about this? So that's where we'll pick up. And Mick, take it away.
Yeah, so Joe, I pulled out onto the highway, and like I said, who do I tell? Who the hell do I tell? And I was questioning myself in my brain. And at one point I thought about going to the police, and then I thought, oh no, that probably wouldn't be a good idea. They'd probably lock me up and send me to a psych ward or something. And I knew what I'd seen. It was real, I'll tell you here and now. And I drove home and I got home, and for, I'd say about 2 weeks, I tried to live a normal life without telling anyone. Now, my wife at the time, she was very open. I was very honest with her, but I just couldn't tell her. I couldn't tell her. It actually took me 3 months to tell her what happened. And it's really weird how things happen, because who I ended up telling, first of all, was my 2 sisters, because they were fairly open to stuff. And so I told them, and they were interested in it, but I could sense that they were probably thinking, oh, Mick's lost it. That's the feeling I got. And then my middle son, his best mate, his best mate's mum was right into, collecting skulls and I suppose New Age stuff. And so I went and seen her, and I told her the story. And she put me onto a researcher, and I'll call her Anne for the story, and I'm definitely going to call her Anne. I've got it written in front of me so I don't make a mistake. And so I emailed this Anne lady, and she has written several books on abductees and contactees and the UFO phenomena. And I emailed her, and at the time, I think she was living in Queensland, and she was having a seminar in Canberra. And anyway, I made an arrangement to go and meet her at this seminar in Canberra, which is the capital of Australia, and talk to her about my event. So there I go. I'm trying to live a life of normality, right? And it's really weird, you suddenly realise that we're lied to so much, like, newspapers, radios, politicians, they all don't tell the truth. And I must admit, maybe a lot of them don't know themselves, but I really, really struggle, because I know what I saw, I know what I witnessed, and I know it was real, and I know I wasn't delusional, or, I wasn't drinking or drug taking.
Before we get too far, let me go back and get a couple questions answered. The description of like being in a no sound. You went from a noisy outdoor area with birds and chirping, wind blowing, and all of that. But during the encounter itself, you said everything was absolutely silent. You ever experienced that in your life before?
Leading up to it, no. No way, no.
How would you describe the possibility for that even happening? What could turn off wildlife, turn off the breeze? What could, it's almost like it's incomprehensible that that's possible,
Yeah, absolutely, Joe. I've got no idea, mate. Like at that time, I'd been an outdoorsman, and I'd hiked and hunted and all the rest of it all throughout Australia and locally, and I can't explain that. That was the other thing, because there's these things that ran through my mind, trying to question everything, and like one of them was exactly that. How could it be totally quiet? How? There's no way. Like, you can't just turn sound off. No way, unless you suddenly go deaf yourself or something. There was that. There was the vibration. I knew I felt that. There was standing there looking at what I was looking at, which at first I thought was a little child, and it wasn't a little child. It was an extraterrestrial, a little grey. I'll put my hands up to that. There was driving 80 metres up the road, and all of a sudden everything coming back to normal, like hearing things properly, and the feeling going away.
Sure.
Um,
Did you know the owner of the property personally?
Yes. So there's two owners. The, the
So
so
the
they've got
books and stuff, that they belong to the current owner
no,
at that time?
they belong to the previous owner.
Okay.
And the previous owner, from what I understand, was, right into New Age and occult type practices. Um, they used to do smoking ceremonies, in a teepee or tent or whatever and stuff like that. And so they owned the books, and there's one part of it which I don't really understand. Joe, is I'm guessing they just up and left in a real hurry, or maybe they didn't even think about going into the toilet with this this little library in there. I don't know. It's really weird. The new owner who I was working for doing the trees, like I worked there I think 4 times, and it was on the last time that this all happened. And I've spoken to him since as I went back there and told him about what happened and asked him if he had any weird experiences. And what's really interesting, I've just remembered, the current owner, he has got several daughters, and he told me that they wander around all through the scrub and the bush, and they find crystals everywhere. Everywhere throughout the bush, there's these little crystals throughout the bush. Now, that's just part of the story. But yeah, the noise, it was weird. I've had it since, and we'll have to do a part 2.
Sure. Sounds like it.
Yeah, in
Okay.
Canada.
Back to meeting um, the researcher.
Yeah, so I'll lead up to that a bit. So after 3 months, I finally told my my ex-wife. Like at the time we were married, and we went up to my sister's place up in the Dandenongs, which is just out of Melbourne. It's a big mountain range where lots of people, live, and went up there. And on the way back, when we were there on the night, I got a little bit drunk, and on the way back, I thought, I've got to tell her, because I've got to go and meet this researcher. I'd been kind of semi-secretly texting this researcher to say that I was going to, meet her at this meeting. So I told my ex-wife, and she was fine. She because she knows I don't lie, and she was quite blown away by the whole thing. So then, at the time, my business wasn't going overly well, and we had to, scrimp and scrape to get the money, to get enough money to fly up to Canberra, which was not overly expensive. I think at the time it was in 2008. I think it was only $95. No, I can't remember now. It wasn't a lot to fly up there and back. 45 minutes up and 45 back. And then I had to, quite obviously have a hire car and a motel room. And anyway, we skimped and scraped, and we booked our tickets, and then I had to quite obviously pay the money to go to this seminar. And the seminar was on Friday night and Saturday. So Friday I had the day off, and really early in the morning I drove down to the Melbourne International Airport, Tullamarine, jumped on a jet, flew to Canberra, uneventful, landed there, and went over and booked a hire car and threw me stuff in the car, and I drove around trying to find somewhere to stay. And I found a motel, booked a motel room, and this motel room, it was a bit of a life-changing event happened in there on 2 nights, the Friday night and the Saturday night, but I'll get to that. So I got in the room and, checked it out, put my stuff out, and then I jumped back in the car and I drove to where they were going to have the seminar. And so I did a bit of a recce, went there, had a look, took note of how long it took me to get there. And I can't remember what time it started. I think it started at 7 o'clock in the evening. I can't remember. But anyway, so I left half an hour beforehand and drove to the seminar. And got there, and it's really weird, you know. This is the first time I'd ever been to a UFO meeting of any sort of thing. And this seminar was on UFOs, alien abduction. There's other subjects, but I can't remember what they were. And I honestly, I'm going to say this, I half expected to walk in and see people with T-shirts on with, you know, ET phone home, and people with hats on with antennas. I had no idea what I was going to see, you know, and I'm thinking, oh my God, what have I got myself in for? You know, hopefully these people are normal people. And, you know, what's really interesting, Joe, I walked into the place and I was probably, I don't know, about the 15th odd person to get in. And I'm looking around and everyone was just normal. You know, they had business suits on and just normal people. And I sort of thought, thank you. I'm glad of that, you know, because I honestly had this vision in my mind that they'd be all just fruitcakes. And anyway, I'm standing just by myself, and you know, I can normally talk to anybody, and I'm sort of just standing back and just, you know, everyone, like, it appeared that a lot of the people knew themselves or knew each other or whatever, and a couple of people walked over and shook my hand and introduced themselves, and anyway, there's this one guy that was off in the corner, so I walked over him and I said, "Oh, how you going, mate? What are you here for?" And he said, "Oh, I'm just here to, you know, listen to the seminar and rah rah rah." And oh yeah. I said, "Oh, have you had any experiences, or have you had an experience?" And he told me about him and his father were hiking, and they seen this, you know, this light that come close to him. And anyway, all of a sudden in walked, and I'll call her Anne, and this lady's only a very short, you know, lady, blondie white hair, and everyone's fluffing around her, talking and giving her hugs and kisses and all that. And I'm just standing back, you know, minding my own business, because I thought I'll let everyone do their stuff. And then sort of after a while, everyone had sort of dissipated. And then I walked over and put my hand out and I said, "Oh, g'day, Anne. My name's Mick." "Oh, Mick, oh, so glad to meet you." And I said, "Yeah, I'm so glad to meet you." And I said, "Well, when would you like to do the interview tonight?" And she said, "Oh, no, not tonight. No." She said, "How about tomorrow at lunchtime?" So after the seminars are finished and they go into the afternoon seminars, we'll have lunch and then we'll sit down in a nice quiet area and talk about it. I said, "Yeah, absolutely. That'd be great." So I went in, it was like an auditorium, and since the event, I've been to lots of seminars and run a few myself, me and my partner, my new partner. And, you know, it's really big if you get 50 or 60 people. Like, you normally don't get many more than that. Now, you know, there's other places that probably may have hundreds, but everyone I've ever been to, you only get around 50, 60 people. And this auditorium we were in, if you can imagine, it had, you know, like a sloped lot of stairs and a stage down the front, and it was fairly well packed. I couldn't believe it. I guessed it would have been 80, 90, maybe 100 people in it. And I was, you know, at the time, first time ever, I think, wow, a lot of people interested in this. So I'm sitting back, and Mary Ann started her seminar, and I'll tell you here and now, Joe, oh man, I went through mixed emotions. You got no idea. Like, I'm seeing pictures of what I'd seen on the day, and she's talking about it as if it's, you know, people looking at elephants in Africa or something. It was no big deal. There was times where I actually had to close my eyes or look away, and sometimes just block my ears. I couldn't bear to look at what she was talking about. It just freaked me out beyond belief. I was just, wow. And some of the things she was saying about what had happened to people and this and that, you know, like, it was, with her, it was more on the good side. And I don't think there is such a thing as the good side with alien abduction or, you know, contacting these beings, because, you know, I'm a person that looks on both sides of the fence, if you know what I mean. I don't just take everything as gospel. I'll just look at everything, and I'll look at this and I'll look at that, and I'll decide. And mate, you've got no idea. And I dare say anyone that's listening who has ever gone through this experience, it's just, oh, man, it was just so, it was life-changing, you know. And I think the lecture went for 2 hours. And when it finished, like she was going to do another lecture the next morning. It started at 10 and went to 12. And after that, I felt like I was back where I was, you know, on the day when I'd seen this thing. And the fear crept back in and a lot of other things. And anyway, so it all finished and I walked up to Anne and I said to her, look, I'll see you tomorrow, you know, at 10 o'clock, and I'll listen to the rest of your lecture and then we'll have the talk. So I go outside, jump in my car, and just as I'm about to jump in the car, this guy that I was talking to at the start of the, you know, the start of the seminar, he'd overheard me talking to Anne about having, you know, a talk on what happened, and he asked me if he'd mind if he could come along and listen in, just sit in, say nothing, but listen. I said, absolutely, because he'd heard of people, and he mentioned them, and I'd never heard of any of these people, like Travis Walton and, I can't think of the other guys' names, just you know, Billy Meyer, all these other people that had, you know, experiences, and he'd never met one. All of a sudden, here I am, and he's thinking, whoa, and I'm thinking, well, you know, it's the scariest thing I've ever had happen, but I'm happy for you to come in and sit in and listen. So I jump in my car and I drive back to the motel. And anyway, I got into bed and I can, you know, drift off to sleep pretty quick. And sure enough, I went to sleep. And all of a sudden, so I'm dead to the world. All of a sudden I wake up as if I haven't been asleep. Right. So, you know, as you get up in the morning, you know, you have a stretch and rub your eyes and you feel a bit lethargic or whatever. With me, and I think it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, all of a sudden I just woke up as if I hadn't been asleep. And in the room, I hear all this sort of, you know, like if you imagine getting paper and all these little footsteps. And I'm looking around, and in the room, like in the unit that I was in, the motel room, it's fairly big. And I'm looking around, and like it was just light enough to see. Like it wasn't pitch black, but it was light enough to see because there's ambient light coming in through the windows and stuff. And the only way to describe it, it was like, it sounded like little tiny people or little kids running around the room, and I hear this and paper shuffling. And I'm looking around and bang, straight back into fight or flight. You know, and I sat up on my bed, I clenched my fists and I'm looking around. And again, you know, back then I was, you know, buff and strong. And you know, again, I thought game on. And I'm looking around, but there was nothing in the room. And in the end, I just jumped up and I'm running throughout the motel room and I'm looking behind doors and thinking, what is this? And it went on, I reckon it went on for a minute. And all of a sudden it just stopped, right? I can assure you again, the fear was off the scale. Like you got no idea. I thought, what is this? And I remember walking into the bathroom and turning on the light and walking up to the mirror and doing this. You know, have I lost the plot? What is this? What is this? And
Let's pause right there. Hold it right there. We're going to take one more short break, and then we'll come back. Remember, you were looking in the mirror, and that's where we'll start back.
Okay.
All right. Be right back, everyone. How are you on time?
Yeah, fine, mate. Yeah, I've got to start work at 2:30, so it's what 10 to 12 here, but I've got plenty of time. And it's getting close to the end of it sort of thing, because I've sort of, well, yeah, I haven't got much longer to go when I think about it. And then we'll have part 2 some other time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, scary stuff, mate. You got no idea.
All right, let's go back on. I'll lead in. Welcome back, everyone. And we're right at the point where he was looking in the mirror. Take it away, Mick.
Yeah, how embarrassing. So I got back into bed. It's, by this time, I guess, 3:15 in the morning. And I laid there for about an hour, tossing and turning, and I'm going over it. I'd get up, I'd look out the window and think, what was that? What's going on? I honestly thought I was losing the plot. And anyway, so finally I went to sleep and I got up in the morning, had brekkie, and I drove out to the seminar. I got there, probably an hour earlier, and talked to a heap of people. Confirmed with Anne that I was going to have this, meeting. And away she went again, and she spoke for another 2 hours on alien abduction and, contactees. And again, it sort of brought it all back again. A lot of it was very interesting, though, I must admit. It was good because it sort of opened me up to a lot of stuff, and as in understanding things. So that finished. We had lunch, and then we finally sat down to have this meeting. And for me to tell what I just told you, but I went into way more detail than what I've told you. I went from A to B with everything I did, and it's way more detail. But basically, what you heard is what happened. The guy come and sat in on the meeting, and he asked if his partner could sit in as well. And I said, yeah, that's fine. I said, all I ask is just don't interrupt, don't ask questions until the very end, because this is very, very personal. And the lady was a dead set skeptic, and the guy that wanted to sit in on the meeting, he told me so. He said, look, she's a skeptic. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, if she doesn't believe, that's fine. But after what she hears here, she may believe, or she might go home, asking questions. So, we sat down and said, okay, Mick, tell your story. So I told it as I told you guys in the audience here, but way more detail. And at the very end there, she said, is there anything you want to ask? And I said, I'll be honest, I started crying at the time. And I remember she put her hand out and she held my hand. And she said, okay, Mick, just tell us what you want to ask. And I said, if this is all real, and I know it is, and I know what I experienced, and I know what I heard, seen, felt, how do I protect my wife and my children? Because I, had my wife and my 3 kids at the time. And at the time, my kids were only, I think about 14, 12 and 10. And after what I'd seen at the site and what I'd listened to for 4 hours, I knew this is all real. And she said to me, have you ever been harmed? And I sort of thought about it. And I said, well, yeah. And she said, how? And I said, I've been in fights on the footy field and, on the school train and that school. And she said, no, that's not what I mean. She said, have you ever been harmed by anything that you recall? And I had no recall of anything other than the one event that I've just told you guys. And she said, more than likely you've been abducted since you were a small child. Now, I'm only going by what she was saying at the time. And she said, if you have no recall of being harmed, then why would they start now? And at the time, you know, I thought, well, yeah, they probably wouldn't harm me, because I have no recall of being harmed. But I must admit, I've found out a lot of stuff since, which I won't go into. And this was the defining point in my life. This was what led me, I guess, to Jesus, because at the time, I believed there was a creator, but I wasn't religious in any way, shape, or form. You know, I believed, you know, that there was, you know, a God as such. And she was holding my hand, I was crying, and she said, Mick, if these things come into your room and start doing anything and you just don't want to be a part of it, or you don't want them there, she said, just use these words. And she said, and this is what she said, and I'll just repeat what she said. She said, just say out loud, in the name of Jesus Christ, if you are not here for my greater good, go, and go now. And, you know, Joe, there's certain things in my life that really stick in your brain, and that's one of them. What she just said, and I thought, okay. And you know, again, I'm not at the time I wasn't a religious guy. I just, you know, but I thought I'll just keep that in mind. And you know, I can remember my pre-takeoff checks when I was 16. You know, flying aeroplanes and temp fish and you know, trim neutral throttle 1,000 master on max of both. You know, certain things that you have to remember in life. And anyone that's watching this, the words I just said, please remember them.
Repeat again. Who told you this?
The researcher.
The one that you had the interview with.
Yes. And
but she was pro contact.
Yes.
But yet she shared that information with you.
Yes. And I've never heard her say it to anyone else ever. And we were pretty close to this lady after the event, you know, and it often makes me wonder sometimes where sometimes people, you know, maybe just have to tell the truth. They have to say the truth. And because she never ever says it in any of her lectures. Like she stands out there and never says that, but she said that to me because she knew I was really upset, and I was, mate. It was life-changing what happened to me on that day. So,
before you move on,
yeah,
you made the statement you weren't a spiritual person at that time.
Yep.
Did you have you had any upbringing prior to this experience through your family or anybody else in any belief system at all?
When I was, you know, at primary school, so when I first began school, we used to have religious instructions. So I think it was every Wednesday, we had a lady come in the afternoon. She talked about, you know, God and Noah's Ark, and so yeah, look, a little bit. And you know, we used to say the Lord's Prayer and things like that. But then when I left primary school, I just forgot about the whole lot. And since then, I now know the Lord's Prayer quite well. My father was religious, and what's really bizarre about this, Joe, is I've got to think what he was. He was a Jehovah's Witness. Yet, when I grew up through my whole life as a kid, and I sort of don't remember Dad being overly religious, all right? But when I say that, I work with my dad because he, you know, we used to clear power lines. So when I left school, I worked from 17 right through to, I forget what it was, 45, I think it was, clearing power lines and cutting trees. And my dad used to, he'd say biblical quotes, and I just took it with a grain of salt. I never, you know, he never appeared to me that he was super religious, and I definitely wasn't at all. In fact, I was I used to get angry with my dad because, you know, he, at the latter stage, when I finally found out he was getting more and more religious, he wouldn't accept, you know, Christmas presents and things like that. And that really hurt me. I was just really bitter and twisted with it all. And, but now, I understand, you know, because I understand now more about religions and how different religions have different beliefs. You know.
Well, what did you think about her when she told you that? Being that you had really no, you had no belief system that you were set in, yet she shares with this, you know, call on Jesus Christ. You know, how did that set into you? What did you make of that at that time when she told you that?
That's a very good question, because I was sort of dumbfounded by her saying that. Right? I never, up until recently, never really knew that. She never ever says that in her, you know, her seminars or whatever. It was advice, and I was open to any advice. Right at that time, like that, basically from that point right through to now, I become, you know, a researcher, and I researched everything you could think of, and maybe it was Christ's intervention. I don't know. I honestly don't know, Joe.
You know, I'm just trying to, you know, to see what your impression was there, because here you had something that happened to you that you didn't believe in before, and she's trying to share with you a way to protect yourself with something that you don't believe in either. You know.
Yeah. But I put my hand up. I wanted something, mate. And when she said that, I'll be honest, I took note of it because that was the first bit of advice I'd got.
Sure.
But this is where I found out that it worked. Okay, this is where I found out where it works, and I'll just move on from this point.
Sure.
So where were we? So Saturday afternoon, the event I think finished at 4 o'clock, and we all said our goodbyes, and I went back to the hotel, motel, whatever I was staying in, and I'd, you know, bought a few books, and I'd been highly recommended to research. Talk to as many people as you can, join UFO groups, you know, buy books, talk to people, watch YouTube clips, and, you know, videos. And so I went back to the unit, and I had tea, went to bed, and I went to sleep. So this is Saturday night, and I'm in bed asleep, and again, all of a sudden, I wake up, and again in the room is this, and at one point there's where was I? So I'm laying in bed, and to my left there was the hallway, and this hallway would have been 50 or 60 meters long. It was a really big motel, and I don't know if you know. What's the guy's name? Usain Bolt. He's the fastest man on earth, you know, Olympic or Commonwealth runner. And I hear this down the hallway, and really loud, super impossible, absolutely impossible fast running. And in the room is all this, you know, little sort of footsteps and paper shuffling again. And I'm there, and again, boom, fight or flight. And I'm looking around. And then all of a sudden, I don't know, just thank you, God. What Anne said to me just clicked into my mind, and I said out loud, in the name of Jesus Christ, if you are not here for my greater good, go, and go now. And it stopped instantly. It wasn't 5 seconds later or 10 seconds later. It was instantaneous. Everything stopped. as in the running and the people shuffling and you know, the noises. And I thought, wow, okay. And I got out of bed and I'm still in the fight or flight mode, you know, and I'm walking around, you know, just like the night before. I looked out the window and I got back and I sat on the edge of my bed and I'm thinking, wow, that worked. That worked. And yeah, and from that day on, I just realised that Jesus, when you use his name, he's got the greatest power in the world, on everywhere. And it was life-changing for me at that time, mate. It was life-changing. And I remember I got up the next morning, I just sat there, I had breakfast and I just sat there contemplating, thinking it over and over, what I experienced, what I said, and how instantaneously it stopped. Just bang, and it stopped as soon as I said the words. And I thought, wow. And so, in a way, from that point, it set something ticking over in my mind. And I jumped on the plane, went at the airport, jumped on the plane, flew back to Melbourne. And I'll never forget, I was walking through the airport and I'm looking at, you know, air hostesses and cleaners and tourists, you know, and they're all got their bags and they're all got their, you know, shorts on and their hats, and they're all off on holidays or coming back from holidays. And it was really, really surreal. I remember at one point actually looking at a lady wheeling a pram with a baby in it. And I thought, if only you people know what I know now, you know. And
You just had your worldview changed twice.
oh, mate, it's unreal. And I got in my car and I had to drive from Tullamarine Airport, excuse me, to Druin. So about an hour and a half drive. It's really interesting. On the way, I got to a place called Pakenham, and there's a massive thunderstorm just slightly to the north, and behind us from the west, the sun was shining, and you imagine this thunderstorm, and it was black and it's pouring, there's lightning, but slightly to the south, as I'm driving east, it was clear, and the sun was low and it was super bright, and this rainbow went up and over, and the rainbow come down on exactly the point where I had my encounter, right? The bottom of one side of the rainbow. Quite obviously, it was, you know, well in front of it, because from where I was to the site was, I don't know, about 25 Ks or whatever, but the rainbow was closer, quite obviously, but it was right where it happened. And I went home and I remember Anne told me that I have to tell my children, because she said they'll be a part of this. And so I went home and I told my ex, I said, look, you know, I told her what happened. And I said, we've got to tell the kids. And she said, no way. And I said, no, I've got to, because they'll be a part of it. And she said, no, you're not doing that. And me and her didn't fight very often, but we had a massive argument. And because I had to tell the kids. And so I got my kids by themselves one day and I told them what happened. And then from that point, they told me a few little things that they'd sort of seen and what hadn't really told me. And from that point, my two boys and my daughter all experienced stuff, right? And my daughter saw a UFO one night with her boyfriend up near a place called Healesville. My son saw another one. And my middle son, I can't remember what he'd seen, but all of them experienced stuff, right? And at the time I said to them, well, you know, don't be scared, you know, because it was all, I sort of got into this new age stuff, you know, it was all love and light and they're all here for humanity and rah, 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 rah. And I've since found out I was extremely, extremely misled and wrong. And
You didn't share the Jesus Christ part with them?
I honestly don't remember that, Joe. I cannot recall. I don't know. No, I can't say I did or I didn't. I have since, like recently, but not at the time. I didn't, because again, at the time I wasn't super religious, or wasn't, but I knew it worked because I'd experienced it. And I've told this story, I guess, I don't know, 80, 100 times, probably 200 times, I don't know. And but I've always told them about, when I use the Jesus Christ part of it, using his name. And I don't know whether anyone have, come away from that, taken that on board or not. But for me, it worked 100%. There's no ifs or buts. It just worked. And so from that point, I become a researcher, and I went to lots of seminars. I went to Adelaide and met Charles Hall. And Charles Hall has had experiences in area 53, I think it is. It's not 51. He was a weather forecaster who had experiences of tall whites. I remember me and him, he seemed a very religious man. And I remember me and him talked about fear. And at the end of the seminar, me and him had a one-on-one for about 10 minutes, just talking about how to overcome fear. And he used Jesus Christ also. It's very interesting. And again, those things just plugged into my mind. And so who else?
It's interesting that twice now, just in this interview, that we know of two researchers who don't follow what their advice is, but do know that it works. And, this is that dirty little secret in the UFO community.
Yeah.
And that's what I came across too early in the research is they know, but it doesn't promote their agenda.
Yeah.
But, because they're still human beings and they still care for people, when they come across somebody that's really, really, really hurting, they'll let it out. I want the listeners to know this because, our research proves that it works, proves why it works.
Yeah.
But it's still that unwanted piece of the puzzle in the UFO community, because if everybody knew this, there wouldn't be any more shows. There wouldn't be any more seminars. There wouldn't be any more books, so it's a shame that something they actually know works, it's not promoted in its fullest.
Yeah,
we're trying to show that. I deal with that with the MUFON Experiencer team too. They know about the work I have. They know about the hundreds of testimonies that prove it. Yet they still don't use it as a number one, way to help people. They're still keeping them in the bondage of, you need to come to support group meetings, maybe do regression hypnosis to find out more what's happened,
Yeah.
None of that does any more than just to keep you, hooked on the experience instead of free from it. So
exactly. We've found that we've drifted away from a lot of people because we've tried to tell them exactly what you just said, and they just don't want to listen. They've got the scales over the eyes and the fingers in their ears, and
no, they're more fascinated in the experience itself, and what the experience does. It's a life, and the experience that I'm talking about is the experience of something that doesn't that's out of the norm.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
that experience in the bush you had was out of the norm. It
Yeah.
changed your entire worldview. Uh, that you had of your life until that point.
Yeah.
And it's a seductive experience, even if it's terrifying. It's a seductive experience. It's almost like taking that first hit of a super drug, and it's that first experience that you never forget when you're using a drug, and the rest of your time as a drug user, you're chasing that first experience.
Exactly.
You want to relive it again,
Yeah.
but you never do.
No.
But because that was the one that changed your worldview. It can never
Yeah.
be the same again.
Yeah.
So I think this is what the seductive part of this type of experience is because it was so changing, life changing. You know, they're looking to have that high again from the experience. People, they talk about the fear like you did, but that in itself is a high too. We have fear junkies out there that we know about, that people do skydiving, they do bungee jumping, they do roller coasters every day, every
Yeah.
chance they get.
Yeah.
These are your fear junkies. There's
Mm.
Because they get a high from that fear.
Mm.
And I truly think a lot of people are sucked in to try and get that experience again, and that's what the
Mm.
seduction is, I believe.
Yeah.
You know, and
Definitely.
then people like I know who the researchers like what you're talking about, the ones that promote the experience. Because a lot of people, their lives don't have a lot of meaning. And when they're set apart with something so extraordinary, they become someone. They become someone that people will listen to now. Whether that's a good thing or
No,
not,
I'm hearing you
they have
fine.
become someone.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and just like what you described when you first went to the meeting, when she walked in, they all started buzzing around her.
Mm.
You know, um, People live off that.
Mm.
They live for that moment of recognition. And
Yeah.
if you can repeat that by showing up at conferences and in that manner, these people get hooked on being recognized.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of the seduction that we're seeing here in your story that we see over and over again in this realm.
Yep.
I just wanted to cover that in the
Yeah.
in this recording.
Yeah. No,
Okay.
I totally agree with you. I guess there's the 15 minutes of fame, and
Yeah.
We're beeping. We're beeping.
we're beeping, Joe.
Okay. Let's set up for session 2.
Definitely.
And there's a lot more I hear to talk about. We'll bring it home in the next session and bring it up to the full turnaround that you've had and your association with CE4 Research.
Definitely.
So thank you, Mick, for coming on, and we look forward to the second show. And to the listeners out there, make sure you tune back in for the finish of Mick's story. And there's still a lot of more powerful stuff to come. So thank you, everyone, and until the next show. This is Joe Jordan from the Piercing the Cosmic Veil show. Thank you.
Thank you. See you, Joe.